Imagine you're standing in the middle of a desert. There is nothing around you, no river, no lake, no road, no sign telling you where to go, just endless sand stretching in every direction, and a sun so hot that even breathing feels exhausting. You reach for your water container and take the last few drops. You shake it, hoping there's somehow more inside. There isn't. You look around. Where would you even begin? Today, if we were lost in a desert, we could use a phone, GPS, a map, or call for help. But thousands of years ago, none of those things existed. And yet, ancient humans crossed some of the harshest deserts on Earth. They somehow knew where to find water in places that looked completely empty. And here's the crazy part. Sometimes the water wasn't even visible. It could be sitting beneath your feet. So how did they know where to look? Let's go back to a time when getting this question wrong didn't mean getting lost. It meant dying. The journey begins early in the morning, before the desert becomes unbearable. A small group of people is moving across the sand. They've been traveling for hours, and everyone knows where they're going, or at least they hope they do. The person leading them isn't carrying a map. They're not following a road. There are no signs pointing toward the nearest water source. Instead, they're watching the landscape. At first, you might think the desert would give you no clues at all, but ancient people who lived around deserts learned something that an outsider wouldn't understand. A desert isn't truly empty. You just have to know how to read it. A tiny patch of plants might look meaningless to us. To someone who has spent their entire life in the desert, it could be a message. A different type of tree, a line of greener vegetation, a patch of ground that doesn't look quite right. Even the behavior of animals could matter. And this is where things get interesting. Imagine you're walking through the desert when the person in front suddenly stops. Everyone stops with them. You look around, you don't see anything. They point toward the sky. A bird. It's flying in one direction. You might think nothing of it, but they start following. Why? Because certain birds and animals need water regularly. If you repeatedly notice animals moving toward a particular area, that can become a clue that water may be nearby. Not every bird means there's a hidden spring waiting underneath the sand. But for people who knew the land intimately, animals could provide useful hints. And now the group changes direction. You keep walking, the sun gets higher, the sand gets hotter, the bird disappears. For the next hour there is nothing. Then someone notices something. Plants. Not a forest, not even a field, just a few small patches of vegetation. But compared with the empty desert around them, they're almost screaming for attention. The group walks toward them, and now they begin looking at the ground. Because sometimes the most important clue isn't what you can see above the desert, it's what the desert is hiding underneath. Think about it. If water is underground, you can't simply look at the sand and see a giant blue lake waiting below. So how would you know? Ancient people learned to pay attention to places where plants could survive. If certain vegetation keeps appearing in an otherwise dry landscape, something has to be helping it grow. Maybe there's seasonal water. Maybe there's a shallow underground source. Maybe the land collects water after rare rainfall. The important thing is that the desert itself is giving clues. You just have to notice them. The group keeps moving. Eventually, they reach a place where the ground looks slightly different. There is no river, no obvious spring, nothing that looks like water. The leader kneels down. They touch the ground. They look around. Then they begin digging. You might be thinking, there's no way this works. The first few inches are dry. They keep digging. Still nothing. More sand, more dirt. The sun is beating down. Everyone is getting impatient. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe the plants meant nothing. Maybe the water is somewhere else. But they keep going. And then the soil changes. It's darker, cooler, moister. Someone notices it. Everyone stops. The digging becomes faster. And suddenly, water begins appearing. Not a huge underground lake exploding out of the ground. Just enough moisture to prove something. They were right. There was water here. Imagine the feeling. You've spent hours walking through a place where everything looks dead. And suddenly the ground beneath you is wet. You start digging faster. More people join. And eventually they have enough water to drink. That moment might seem almost magical. But it wasn't magic. It was knowledge. Knowledge built from years of living in the same landscape. And this is one of the most important things to understand about ancient desert travelers. They weren't randomly wandering around hoping to get lucky. People who lived in deserts developed incredibly detailed knowledge of their environment. They remembered where water appeared after rain. They remembered which paths animals used. They knew where certain plants grew. They knew where temporary pools could form. And they passed that knowledge from one generation to the next. Imagine being a child in one of these communities. You don't learn the desert from a textbook. You learn it by walking through it. An older person points at a plant and tells you something about it. They show you a particular rock formation. They tell you where to stop after a certain number of days. They show you where water can sometimes be found. You remember. Then years later, you teach someone else. And that's how a desert becomes almost like a map. Except the map isn't drawn on paper, it's inside your head. But what happens when there are no plants, no birds, no obvious clues? What if you're standing in the middle of a giant stretch of sand with absolutely nothing to follow? This is where desert travel becomes even more dangerous. Because finding water wasn't always about discovering a secret underground source. Sometimes the smartest thing you could do was know where water had already been found before. Ancient travelers could follow known routes between reliable water sources. Think of it like stepping stones. You don't cross the entire desert in one giant journey. You move from one water source to another. Maybe today's destination is a well, then tomorrow's destination is an oasis, then another well, then another source. The distance between those places could determine whether a journey was possible at all. And this is why wells became became so important. A well changed everything. Instead of waiting for rain or searching for a natural spring, people could deliberately reach underground water. But digging a well in the wrong place would be a disaster. You could spend hours, days, or even longer digging and find nothing useful. So once again, how did they know where to dig? They watched, they remembered, and they learned from the land. A place where vegetation repeatedly appeared could be a clue. A depression in the landscape could collect rainwater. A dry riverbed could sometimes hold water beneath the surface. A natural spring could reveal itself where underground water reached the surface. And sometimes people simply knew because generations before them had already discovered it. That last part is easy to overlook. Imagine discovering a water source for the first time. You find a place where water appears. You drink, you survive, but the real value of that discovery isn't just the water you drink today. It's the knowledge you can give to everyone who comes after you. You can tell your children, they can tell theirs. Eventually, an invisible network of knowledge spreads across the landscape. People know where to go, they know when to travel, they know where to stop, and suddenly a place that looks completely impossible to cross becomes a route. But deserts have another problem. Even if you know where the water is, you still have to survive long enough to reach it. Imagine leaving a water source in the morning. You know the next one is ahead, but it's still many hours away. The sun rises higher. Your mouth becomes dry, your water becomes more valuable with every step. Now every decision matters. Do you drink now or save it? Do you keep walking or rest? Do you take the shorter route across open sand or the longer route where you know there might be shade? These weren't abstract problems. A mistake could become fatal, and that's what makes ancient desert travel so fascinating. The desert didn't need to attack you. It simply waited. If you made enough wrong decisions, it would win. But ancient people weren't helpless. They adapted. They learned when to travel. They learned to avoid the worst heat when possible. They learned how to protect themselves from the sun. They learned how to carry and store water. And most importantly, they learned to respect the landscape, because the desert could look completely lifeless while hiding exactly what you needed. Sometimes water was hidden beneath the sand. Sometimes it was sitting in a depression in the ground. Sometimes it was stored inside plants. Sometimes it appeared only after rare rainfall. And sometimes the best clue was simply knowing that water had existed there before. But there is one thing that makes all of this even more incredible. Ancient people didn't have to understand the desert in the way a modern scientist understands it. They didn't need complicated explanations about underground water systems. They didn't need to know every detail of how water moved through layers of rock. They needed something much simpler. They needed to know, where can I find water? And they learned the answer by living there. Imagine spending your entire childhood surrounded by the same desert. You would notice things that a visitor wouldn't. You would remember which areas become green after rain. You would recognize distant landmarks. You would notice where animals gather. You would know which paths are safe. You would remember where someone found water years ago. And eventually, the desert wouldn't look empty anymore. It would look full of information. A stranger sees sand. You see a path. A stranger sees a dry riverbed. You see a possible water source. A stranger sees a few trees. You see a clue. A stranger sees an endless horizon. You see a route you've known your entire life. And maybe that's the biggest difference between us and ancient desert travelers. We rely on technology to tell us where we are. They relied on memory. We look at a screen. They looked at the land. We search for a location. They remembered one. And this knowledge could mean the difference between reaching the next settlement and never making it there. Now imagine returning to that first scene. You're standing in the middle of the desert. Your water is almost gone. The sun is burning above you. There is no river anywhere. No obvious sign of life. You look around and think there is nothing here, but an ancient desert traveler might look at the exact same landscape and notice something you completely missed. A small plant, a line in the ground, a distant bird, a particular rock formation, a dry channel, a familiar path, and suddenly they know where to go. They start walking. You follow. You don't understand why, but they do. After an hour, you see a few more plants. The ground changes. The group begins moving faster. Someone starts digging, and this time you already know what they're looking for. The soil becomes darker, then damp, then suddenly, there it is, water. Cold, hidden water sitting beneath a landscape that looked completely dead. You drink, and for a moment the entire desert disappears from your mind. There is no heat, no fear, no journey, just water. And when you think about it, that's what makes this story so incredible. Ancient humans didn't conquer the desert by making the desert disappear. They learned how to live with it. They watched it. They remembered it. They respected it. And they passed its secrets from one generation to the next. So the next time you see an endless desert in a movie and think there's absolutely nothing out there, remember, there might be. You just might not know how to see it, because to an ancient human who knew the land, the desert wasn't empty. It was a giant map, and somewhere beneath all that sand, there was water.